There's a moment in every marriage where you feel this strange, silent shift. For me, it started with the little things. You'd think it'd be something obvious, like screaming fights or dramatic exits. But nah, it was more like tiny cracks in the foundation. Subtle at first, almost invisible, until one day you wake up and realize your entire house is leaning at a dangerous angle. Her name's Claire, my wife of 8 years. We met in college. She had this spark in her, like she could take on the world and drag you along for the ride. We had chemistry, real chemistry, not just the bedroom kind. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. But lately, that spark had dimmed, at least when it came to me. I'd catch her smiling at her phone like a damn teenager. She started dressing nicer for work, which would have been fine if she didn't look like she was walking onto a fashion runway every morning. And then there were the excuses. "I've got a late meeting," she'd say, brushing past me, not even waiting for my reply. Or, "Don't wait up. I've got a lot to catch up on." The first few times, I didn't think much of it. People get busy. Deadlines pile up. But when the late nights became a regular thing, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Something was off. Real off. The paranoia started slow, creeping in like a shadow you can't shake. I found myself lying awake at night, replaying conversations and trying to find hidden meanings. Did her voice sound different when she talked to me? Was she laughing a little too hard when she mentioned her boss, Greg? Greg, the smooth-talking, too charming for his own good department head. I'd met him once at a company barbecue. He had one of those perfectly symmetrical faces that made you hate him on principle. The kind of guy who probably spritz cologne on his socks. And it was Greg she started mentioning more often than anyone else. I couldn't help but wonder, was it in my head? I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. But at some point, coincidences stop being coincidences. The problem is, when you don't trust someone anymore, you start doubting yourself too. It's like a vicious cycle. Every time I confronted her gently, mind you, she'd brush it off. "You're imagining things, Jake. You're being paranoid," she'd say with that patronizing smile that made my blood simmer. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I'd turned into one of those husbands who spiral into suspicion over nothing. But then came the night that shattered any illusions I had left. It started with another late-night phone call. She stepped out of the living room to take it. Her voice hushed, but I could hear the low murmur of her words. I couldn't make out much, but it was enough to tell me she wasn't discussing work spreadsheets. I followed her discreetly, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. She was standing by the back window, phone pressed to her ear. "No, Greg, I can't tonight," she whispered. My stomach tightened at the sound of his name. She laughed softly, intimately. "I know. I miss you too. But Jake's here." There was the confirmation I dreaded but expected. My world tilted. All the doubts, the nagging fears, they crystallized in that moment, sharp and undeniable. She was having an affair with Greg. I don't remember going back to bed. It's like my mind went on autopilot. I felt numb, hollowed out from the inside. You always hear about people having these epic breakdowns when they discover infidelity, screaming matches, smashed plates. But that wasn't me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Claire came to bed an hour later, slipping under the covers like everything was fine. She didn't even notice my rigid posture, didn't sense that the man lying beside her had just witnessed the collapse of their marriage. I didn't say a word. Not that night. Not the next morning. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. Divorce? Maybe. But something inside me, a darker, meaner part one hadn't known existed, whispered that I wasn't ready to give up that easily. Not yet. If she thought she could treat me like a fool, like some clueless husband oblivious to her sneaky escapades, she had another thing coming. But I wasn't going to explode in a fit of rage. No, I was going to play this smart. Make her feel every ounce of the pain she'd inflicted on me. The morning after I heard Claire's call, I woke up with a plan forming in the back of my mind. I needed confirmation, irrefutable evidence that would strip her of the ability to gaslight me. This wasn't just about catching her, it was about regaining control. Claire had stolen that from me with her lies and deceit, and I wanted it back. She was already gone by the time I rolled out of bed. Another early meeting, according to the text she'd sent me at 6 a.m. I stared at my phone for a long moment, debating. If I confronted her now, she'd just lie, twist the narrative until somehow I became the unreasonable one. No, I couldn't walk into this empty-handed. I did the thing I never thought I'd do in my life. I became a damn detective. I dug through her phone records and text logs when I had the chance. Technology's a beautiful thing when you're suspicious. The evidence stacked up quickly. Dozens of late-night calls with Greg. Flirty texts disguised as work banter. Claire might have been careful, but not careful enough. It hit me like a gut punch. There was no ambiguity anymore. She wasn't just emotionally distant. She was gone. I felt like an idiot for hoping I'd been wrong. But the next discovery twisted the knife deeper. She'd taken a half-day off work and hadn't mentioned it to me. I needed to know where she was. I followed her. Yeah, I know how that sounds. Believe me, I hated myself for it. But I couldn't shake the urge to see the truth with my own eyes. She drove to a hotel on the other side of town. I parked in a side lot, heart pounding in my ears. I watched as she stepped out of her car, wearing that same dress she used to reserve for date nights with me. Greg was waiting at the entrance. He leaned down, kissed her on the cheek. Seeing that kiss, it shattered something in me. There it was, out in the open. No excuses, no denies. Just cold, hard proof. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in because of scene, but I didn't. Instead, I drove away, rage simmering beneath the surface. Confronting them in a fit of fury wasn't going to give me what I wanted. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the narrative, paint me as some crazed husband who lost his mind over a kiss. No, I was going to be smarter than that. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming control over my life, my dignity. I spent the next few days in a haze of anger and numbness. Every time Claire came home, pretending everything was fine, I had to bite my tongue. It took every ounce of self-restraint not to explode at her. I couldn't trust myself to stay calm. Not yet. That's when I found an unlikely ally, her mother, Elaine. Elaine had always been supportive of our marriage. We weren't super close, but she'd been a rock for both of us when we'd hit rough patches. She called me one evening just to check in. Maybe she sensed something was wrong. Or maybe Claire had been acting weird around her too. "You all right, Jake?" she asked after a few minutes of small talk. Her voice was warm, comforting. "You sound off." I hesitated. It wasn't like me to open up about this kind of thing, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I don't know, Elaine. Things have been tense between me and Claire. She's been distant. I think something's going on." There was a long pause on the other end. "Distant how?" she asked carefully. I sighed. "She's always working late. She's secretive with her phone. I followed her to a hotel the other day." The words tasted bitter coming out of my mouth, but I needed to say them. "I think she's having an affair." Elaine didn't gasp or freak out like I expected. Instead, her voice dropped to a calm, serious tone. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how hard that must be. Have you confronted her?" "Not yet. But I need to be smart about this." "Good. Don't act on impulse. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." Those words hit harder than I thought they would. For the first time in days, I felt grounded, like I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts. Elaine had given me an anchor. Over the next week, we started talking more. She'd call to check in, or I'd vent about my frustrations. Slowly, a bond began to form between us, one I hadn't anticipated. There was something comforting about Elaine's presence, her honesty, her empathy. She didn't try to sugarcoat things or give me cliches about marriage being hard work. She understood my pain, my anger, and that connection became complicated. I didn't plan for it to happen, but one night, after too many glasses of wine and a conversation that went deeper than either of us expected, something shifted. She leaned closer, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I forgot about Claire entirely. When our lips met, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about finding solace in someone who understood me when the woman I'd married had become a stranger. The kiss with Elaine wasn't planned, but in that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It was tender, hesitant, as if we were both testing the waters of something we knew we shouldn't be diving into. I could still taste the wine on her lips as her hand gently cupped my face. It was surreal, like stepping into a dream where the rules of reality didn't matter. But reality came crashing back the second we pulled away. She began, her voice barely above a whisper, eyes wide and searching mine for some sort of explanation. "I don't know what that was," I said quietly, trying to find words. But I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't just an accident. It was a release, a moment of comfort that neither of us had anticipated but both needed. I felt exposed, raw in a way I hadn't been since everything with Claire started unraveling. And from the way Elaine looked at me, she felt the same. "We probably shouldn't have," she trailed off, but her hand lingered on mine for a few seconds longer than it should have. "No, we shouldn't have," I agreed, though I didn't move away. We sat there in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on us. I didn't feel guilt, not yet, at least. If anything, there was a strange sense of satisfaction bubbling underneath all the confusion. For once, I wasn't the one being played. I had taken something back, even if it was in the most unconventional, messed up way possible. We eventually said goodnight, both of us walking on eggshells, unsure how to process what had happened. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss in my mind. Part of me wondered if this was the lowest point I'd ever hit, sinking into an emotional entanglement with my wife's mother out of revenge and loneliness. But another part of me didn't care. I wasn't going to feel guilty for something Claire had driven me to. She was out there screwing Greg without a second thought about what it was doing to me. So why should I hold myself to some higher moral standard? Maybe this was exactly what I needed to reclaim my power. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Claire's behavior didn't change. She was still distant, still working late with Greg. I played along, pretending to be the clueless, loving husband. But internally, I was a storm of rage, grief, and cold calculation. The difference now was that I wasn't suffering alone. I had Elaine. Our relationship shifted subtly, but unmistakably. At first, we both acted like the kiss never happened. We went back to our normal conversations, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But there was an undercurrent of tension between us and awareness that something deeper had been awakened. The dam finally broke one night when she invited me over for dinner. Claire was staying late at work again, so I had no excuse not to go. Elaine was nervous, fidgeting with the edge of her blouse as she set the table. I noticed every little detail about her that night, the way her hair caught the light, the delicate curve of her neck. She wasn't just my mother-in-law anymore. She was a woman who saw me, who listened to me in a way Claire hadn't in years. After dinner, we ended up on the couch, sharing more wine than either of us should have. The conversation turned personal too personal. "Do you ever wonder how things ended up like this?" she asked softly, her gaze distant. "How people who once loved each other can become strangers?" "Every damn day," I replied, the bitterness slipping into my voice. "I don't even recognize Claire anymore. It's like she's become this whole other person." Elaine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know if she's ever going to realize what she's lost." There was a pause, a charged silence that hung between us. She leaned in, and I knew where this was going before it happened. This time there was no hesitation, no awkward pulling away. Our lips met again, and this time it was full of unspoken longing. The kiss deepened, our hands exploring each other as the barriers between us crumbled entirely. The aftermath was a mixture of euphoria and anxiety. We didn't talk about what it meant, not right away. It was easier to exist in that bubble of passion and escape, to ignore the complications that would come crashing down around us eventually. But I wasn't stupid. I knew this wasn't just about comfort anymore. It was revenge. Deep, personal, and emotionally devastating revenge. Claire had taken my trust, my sense of security, and ripped it to shreds. Now, I was taking something from her, something that would cut deeper than any confrontation ever could. The more time I spent with Elaine, the more my plans solidified in my mind. I wouldn't confront Claire just yet. Let her continue her affair, thinking I was none the wiser. Let her build her fantasy world with Greg. And then, when she least expected it, I dropped the bomb on her. I wanted to see the look on her face when she found out. I wanted her to feel the same shock and betrayal I had felt that day at the hotel. And I knew exactly how to deliver it. The days stretched into weeks, and the double life I was leading began to take its toll. On the surface, Claire and I maintained the facade of a functional marriage. We went through the motions, shared breakfasts, awkward conversations about work, and the occasional forced date night. But every smile she gave me felt hollow, every word laced with the unspoken lie between us. I knew she was still seeing Greg. The subtle clues were always there. The scent of unfamiliar cologne on her clothes, her sudden bursts of excitement when her phone buzzed, followed by hurried excuses to step out of the room. But I had my own secret now, one that burned just as brightly. Elaine and I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. We didn't talk about what we were doing in the moral sense. There wasn't much point. We knew it was wrong. We knew it was messy. But the raw, undeniable connection between us was impossible to ignore. She was my escape, and I was hers. In those stolen moments together, the rest of the world ceased to exist. It wasn't just about sex, though the physical side of things was intense. It was about being seen and heard. Elaine understood my pain because, in a way, she shared it. She had her own complicated history with relationships, and maybe that was why we fit so well. We were both broken people finding solace in each other's arms. One night, as we lay tangled in bed, she traced lazy circles on my chest and whispered, "Jake, what happens when Claire finds out?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. The fantasy of revenge had kept me going, but reality was starting to creep in at the edges. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice heavy. "Part of me wants to hurt her, make her feel what I felt. But another part of me—" Elaine lifted her head to look at me. "What?" I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "I don't know if this will fix anything. Even if I get my revenge, it's not going to erase what she did. It's not going to undo all the damage." Elaine nodded slowly. "No, it won't. But maybe it'll give you closure." Closure. That elusive concept everyone talks about, but no one can really define. Would catching Claire off guard, watching her crumble under the weight of her own betrayal, actually bring me peace? Or was I just feeding a monster inside me that would never be satisfied? The internal conflict gnawed at me for days after that conversation. I found myself observing Claire more closely, wondering if she felt any guilt for what she was doing. If she did, she hid it well. To the outside world, she was still the polished, successful career woman who had her life together. But I saw the cracks, the nervous energy when she checked her phone, the way she avoided eye contact when I asked her direct questions. One evening, she came home later than usual, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. I was in the kitchen, pretending to care about whatever sports game was playing on TV. "Long night?" I asked, not looking up. "Yeah," she replied, setting her purse on the counter. "We had a client pitch that ran over." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Did you get it?" "What?" "The client pitch. Did you land it?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, and I saw the lie form in her eyes before she even spoke. "Oh yeah." They were really impressed. "We're moving forward with the next phase." "Good to hear," I said, my voice flat. She must have sensed the lack of warmth, because she shot me a curious glance. "Is everything okay, Jake? You've been distant lately." The sheer audacity of that question almost made me laugh out loud. Distant? Really? I was the one being distant? I forced a smile, one I knew didn't reach my eyes. "Work's been stressful," I lied. "I've got a lot on my mind." She seemed satisfied with that answer and didn't press further. Instead, she kissed me on the cheek and muttered something about taking a shower. I watched her disappear down the hallway, the familiar knot of resentment tightening in my chest. Elaine was right. Claire didn't see what she was losing. She probably thought I'd never catch on, that I'd continue being the clueless, supportive husband while she played house with Greg. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't going to sit back and let her walk all over me. The problem was, the longer this charade continued, the harder it became to separate the man I used to be from the man I was becoming. I didn't recognize myself sometimes. The rage that simmered beneath my skin, the cold, calculated thoughts of revenge, it wasn't who I'd been before. Claire had broken something inside me, and now I was molding the pieces into something darker. But I wasn't alone in that transformation. Elaine was right there with me, caught in the same storm of anger, pain, and twisted desire for justice. Together, we were building a new narrative, one that would eventually come crashing down on Claire in a way she'd never see coming. Patience. That's what it all boiled down to. I had to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger, figuratively speaking. If I rushed things, Claire would twist it, find a way to turn the narrative against me. But if I played my cards right, she wouldn't have a defense. She wouldn't see it coming. My relationship with Elaine continued to evolve. It wasn't just about sex or revenge anymore. We started spending more time together, sometimes just talking for hours. She'd tell me stories about Claire's childhood, her struggles as a single mother raising her only daughter. I found myself wondering how someone as grounded as Elaine had raised someone capable of such cold-hearted deception. Maybe Claire had always been good at hiding her true self. Do you ever think she regrets it? I asked Elaine one night while we sat on her back porch, sipping whiskey under the stars. Elaine tilted her head, considering the question. Maybe, but I think Claire's biggest flaw has always been pride. She's the type of person who doesn't want to admit when she's made a mistake. Even if it's eating her alive inside, she'll act like everything's fine. It's easier for her to bury the guilt than face it. Sounds familiar, I muttered bitterly. Elaine reached over and squeezed my hand. You don't have to let her control your emotions anymore. You're stronger than that. Her words stuck with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity, proving to myself that I wasn't defined by Claire's betrayal. I needed closure, but I also needed to move forward. The line between the two had blurred, but I was starting to find clarity. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came on a Friday night. Claire had another work function, one of those corporate mixers where people pretended to enjoy each other's company while secretly plotting career moves. I knew better. This wasn't about networking, it was about Greg. I decided to tail her again, keeping a safe distance as she drove across town. Sure enough, she pulled into the same hotel parking lot as before. I stayed in my car, watching as she met Greg by the entrance. They laughed, their bodies close but not quite touching. I could see it all so clearly now, their secret world where I didn't exist. But tonight wasn't just about surveillance. I wasn't going to let them get away with it this time. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos of them together, making sure to capture the way Greg's hand rested on the small of her back, the way she leaned into him like a schoolgirl with a crush. This was my evidence, proof, and I wasn't just going to keep it for myself. I waited until they disappeared into the hotel before texting the pictures to Claire's phone with a simple message. Nice night for a work function, huh? It didn't take long for her to respond. My phone buzzed with a series of frantic texts. What are you talking about? Where are you? Jake, please call me. I didn't answer. Let her squirm. Let her feel the panic rising in her chest. I imagined her pacing in the hotel room, trying to come up with a plausible story. But there wouldn't be one. The pictures were damning, and she knew it. An hour later, she was home. I heard the front door slam, and her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to be engrossed in a random TV show. Claire stormed in, her face pale and tense. Jake, we need to talk. I muted the TV and turned to face her. Oh, now you want to talk? That's new. She flinched at the sarcasm. Please, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been screwing Greg behind my back for months? That all those late meetings were just excuses to meet up with him? You think I'm an idiot? Her eyes widened in shock. I didn't mean for it to happen. It's not what you think. Cut the crap, Claire. I snapped, standing up. I saw you. I heard you. I have pictures. So spare me the bull explanation. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. She'd brought this on herself. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. Well, congratulations. You did. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door. I need some air. Don't wait up. As I left the house, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The confrontation was only the beginning. Claire thought the worst part was over, but she had no idea what was coming next. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions, to experience the same devastation she'd inflicted on me. And soon enough, she would. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the house. The adrenaline rush from confronting Claire started to wear off, leaving me with a hollow ache in my chest. I should have felt triumphant. I had caught her, cornered her with irrefutable proof. But instead of satisfaction, there was only exhaustion. Maybe Elaine had been right. Revenge wasn't going to fix anything. Still, the plan wasn't finished yet. Claire thought she'd hit rock bottom when I confronted her. She had no idea that her real downfall was just around the corner. I found myself parked outside Elaine's house without even thinking about it. Her porch light was on, a soft glow that somehow felt inviting. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should leave and deal with this alone. But before I could talk myself out of it, Elaine opened the front door, as if she'd been expecting me. "You okay?" she asked softly, stepping out onto the porch. "Not really," I admitted. I climbed out of the car and walked toward her. "It's done. She knows I caught her." Elaine sighed, folding her arms across her chest. "And how did she take it?" "Exactly like you'd expect. Denial, excuses, the whole script. She tried to play the victim, like she didn't mean for it to happen." Elaine shook her head in disgust. She always did have a talent for avoiding accountability. We went inside, and she poured us both a drink. The tension in my shoulders eased as I sank onto the couch. Elaine sat beside me, her presence a steadying force in the middle of the emotional chaos. "So, what now?" she asked after a few moments of silence. "I'm not sure," I confessed. "Part of me wants to leave her and be done with it. But another part of me, I don't know. I want her to suffer, to understand what she's lost." Elaine leaned closer, her eyes searching mine. "She's already starting to feel that. Trust me, Jake. People like Claire don't realize what they have until it's gone. And you," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "you've got more power than you think. You don't have to stoop to her level to hurt her. Sometimes the most painful thing you can do is walk away with your dignity intact." I took a long sip of my drink, letting her words sink in. There was truth in them, but I wasn't ready to let go just yet. Not entirely. Claire needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal, and I had one final card to play. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from Claire. She tried to engage me in conversation, desperate to smooth things over, but I wasn't interested. I gave her cold, one-word answers, watching as her composure slowly unraveled. The guilt was starting to eat away at her, just as I had hoped. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Jake, please. We need to talk," she begged. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "Talk about what?" "How you cheated on me. How you lied to my face for months." "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I wasn't thinking clearly, and I let things get out of control. But I still love you. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it." I laughed bitterly, cutting her off. "Counseling? You think sitting in a room with a stranger is going to undo what you did? You betrayed me, Claire. You destroyed everything we built." She flinched, the reality of my words finally sinking in. For once, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there defeated. "You don't get to dictate how this goes," I continued, my voice cold and steady. "I'm not here to make you feel better about your choices. You lost that privilege when you walked into that hotel with Greg." Her lip quivered, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the countless nights I'd spent lying awake, drowning in suspicion and pain while she was out living her double life. "I'll be staying with Elaine for a while," I said flatly. "I need space." Claire's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, with my mom? Why?" "Because she actually gives a damn about me," I replied, turning on my heel and walking away. Moving in with Elaine was another step in the plan, but it didn't feel like a manipulation anymore. We had grown closer in ways I never expected, and I found myself craving her company. She didn't judge me, didn't try to control the narrative like Claire always did. With Elaine, I could breathe. The dynamic between us shifted again during those first few nights under her roof. There was no more denying what we had become to each other. We shared quiet evenings, long conversations, and stolen touches that quickly escalated into something deeper. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something in the ruins of my marriage. But I knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever. Claire would find out eventually, and when she did, the fallout would be nuclear. The moment came sooner than expected. It was a Saturday evening, and Elaine and I were sharing dinner. The atmosphere was light, almost peaceful, a strange contrast to the storm brewing on the horizon. We laughed over something trivial, wine glasses clinking as if the world outside didn't exist. But deep down, I knew this tranquility wouldn't last. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Claire. I let it ring, ignoring the temptation to answer. She'd been calling more frequently, her messages growing more desperate with each passing day. I could feel her unraveling, like a thread slowly being pulled from a fraying sweater. "You gonna answer that?" Elaine asked gently, though there was a knowing look in her eyes. "Nope," I replied, taking another sip of wine. "She'll leave a message. She always does." Elaine nodded, but the tension between us was palpable. We both knew that the charade couldn't go on forever. Eventually, Claire would discover the truth, and there'd be no turning back. And that's exactly what happened the next morning. It was early, too early for a civilized visit, when the doorbell rang. I groggily stumbled out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt as I made my way downstairs. Elaine was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the confrontation, waiting on the other side of the door. I opened it and found Claire standing there, disheveled and furious. Her eyes were wild, her breath ragged like she'd been running on pure adrenaline. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. "What am I doing here?" "Are you serious?" she snapped. "Why don't you tell me why you're living with my mother?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I already told you I needed space." "Don't give me that crap, Jake." "I talked to Greg," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "He said you've been distracted, acting weird, and now I find out you've been shacking up with my mom? What the hell is going on?" I smirked, enjoying the panic bubbling beneath her anger. She didn't have the full picture yet, but she was close. "Maybe you should be asking yourself that," I said coolly. "You're not exactly in a position to question my choices, Claire." "Oh, don't play the victim with me," she shot back. "You've been acting like a damn martyr ever since you caught me with Greg. But this is low, even for you." "Low? That's rich," I scoffed. "You're the one who cheated on me, Claire. You broke our marriage. And now you have the nerve to stand here and judge me?" Her face flushed with fury, but there was something else in her eyes, fear. She wasn't just angry. She was terrified of losing control. "I want the truth," she demanded, stepping closer. "What's going on with you and my mom?" Elaine appeared at the top of the stairs before I could answer. She was dressed in a robe, her hair tousled from sleep. The moment Claire saw her, the color drained from her face. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "It's true, isn't it?" Elaine descended the stairs slowly, her expression calm but resolute. She glanced at me, then back at Claire. "You wanted the truth. Well, here it is." Claire staggered backward, as if she'd been physically struck. You slept with him?" "My husband?" Elaine crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "Yes. And before you start throwing stones, maybe you should take a good, hard look at yourself." Claire's mouth opened and closed, words failing her. For the first time, she was completely speechless. I stepped forward, seizing the opportunity to twist the knife. "You thought you could cheat on me and walk away without consequences," I said, my voice cold and measured. "But guess what? Actions have consequences, Claire. You don't get to play the victim anymore." "Consequences?" she repeated, her voice trembling with shock and rage. "You think this twisted little revenge scheme makes you better than me?" "It's not about being better," I replied. "It's about leveling the playing field. You lied to me, betrayed me. Now you know how that feels." Claire looked between the two of us. Disbelief etched across her face. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of pity. She had brought this on herself. "You're both disgusting," she spat, her voice breaking. "You think this makes you strong? It doesn't. It makes you pathetic. Call it what you want," I said, shrugging. "But at least now, you're not the one holding all the cards." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Without another word, she turned and stormed out the door, slamming it behind her. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Elaine exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. "Well, that could have gone better." I chuckled bitterly. "You expected a happy family reunion? No, she admitted with a wry smile. But a girl can dream. The dust had barely settled after Claire's dramatic exit, but the shockwaves of that confrontation reverberated in every part of my life. Claire went radio silent for a few days, which was uncharacteristic. Normally, she'd have sent a flood of angry texts, maybe even staged a few public scenes for maximum effect. But this time, nothing. I wasn't sure if her silence was a sign of surrender, or if she was just biding her time to strike back. Either way, I wasn't about to let my guard down. Elaine, on the other hand, was handling things with a calm practicality that I envied. She'd always been grounded, the type of person who could keep her head in a crisis. But even she seemed shaken by what had happened. "Do you think she's going to retaliate?" I asked one evening as we sat on the couch, nursing cups of tea. Wine had become too easy of a crutch, and we were both trying to stay sharp now that Claire was out for blood. Elaine sighed, stirring her tea absently. "Maybe. Or maybe this will force her to take a long, hard look at herself. Either way, we need to be ready." "I just don't get it," I muttered. "She acts like I'm the villain, like I'm the one who tore us apart. Does she really believe that?" Elaine leaned forward, her eyes soft with understanding. Claire's always been good at rewriting reality to fit her narrative. It's a defense mechanism. She can't face her own mistakes, so she projects everything onto you. "Well, I'm done playing her scapegoat," I said firmly. "If she wants a fight, she'll get one." The fight came sooner than I expected. It started with a knock at Elaine's door a few days later. When I opened it, there stood Claire, cold, composed, and armed with a smug expression that set my teeth on edge. I knew that look. She had a plan. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Elaine appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. The tension in the room was immediate and suffocating. "What do you want, Claire?" Elaine asked, crossing her arms. Claire smiled thinly. "Oh, I'm not here to fight. I just thought it'd be good for us to have a civilized conversation, clear the air." I snorted. "Right? Because you're all about civility." She ignored me and focused on Elaine. "You know, Mom, I never thought you'd be capable of something like this. Betraying your own daughter? Sleeping with my husband? That's a new low, even for you." Elaine's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "Don't you dare try to make me the villain here, Claire. You brought this on yourself." Claire's eyes hardened. "Oh, is that how you justify it? By blaming me for your lack of boundaries?" "You cheated, Claire," I interjected. "You broke our vows. You lied to me for months, and now you want to act like you're the victim?" Her gaze snapped to me, cold and calculating. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like this little affair with my mom makes you some kind of hero. Newsflash, Jacob doesn't. It just makes you sad and desperate." "Desperate? That's rich, coming from someone who couldn't keep her legs closed for her boss." I shot back, my voice laced with venom. "Enough!" Elaine's voice cut through the tension like a whip. We both turned to her, startled by the force of it. She stepped between us, her eyes blazing with anger. "This isn't solving anything. You both need to stop." Claire huffed, crossing her arms. "Fine, let's get to the point then. Jake, I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it still hit harder than I'd expected. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Good," I said quietly. "I've been waiting for you to say that." Her composure faltered for a moment, as if she'd expected me to beg for reconciliation. When I didn't, her mask cracked, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she said, regaining her icy demeanor. "Don't expect me to go easy on you." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied calmly. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Elaine let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging. Well, that went about as well as expected. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my temples. At least it's out in the open now. No more secrets. "True," she said softly, sitting beside me. "But the hardest part is still ahead." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. The confrontation had been brutal, but in a strange way, It felt like a turning point. There was no going back now. The marriage was dead, and both Claire and I knew it. But I wasn't broken anymore. I'd reclaimed my power, my sense of self. And no matter what Claire tried to throw at me next, I was ready. In the weeks following the confrontation, the divorce process began in earnest. Claire and I communicated solely through lawyers, which was a relief. The days of tense, superficial conversations were over. Now it was all about negotiating terms, splitting assets, agreeing on logistics. Claire was out for blood, of course, but I wasn't the pushover she had once manipulated. I pushed back, and for every unreasonable demand she made, I matched her with cold, strategic moves. Elaine stayed by my side through it all. We tried to keep things discreet, though we both knew it was only a matter of time before word got out. Claire had likely already told a few select people her version of events, painting me as a heartless bastard who'd betrayed her with her own mother. But I didn't care. Let them talk. The truth was messy, but I wasn't going to let their opinions define me. Elaine and I had deeper conversations about where we were headed. Was this thing between us temporary, a byproduct of the chaos surrounding Claire's betrayal? Or was it something more? I don't want to be just a rebound for you, Elaine said one night as we lay together, her head resting on my chest. You're not a rebound, I assured her, brushing my fingers through her hair. You've been my anchor through all of this. I don't know where I'd be without you. She tilted her head to look at me, her expression vulnerable. It's complicated, though. People are going to judge us. Let them, I said firmly. They don't know what we've been through. They don't understand. She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing small patterns on my chest. As long as we're on the same page. We were. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about Claire at all. It was about moving forward with someone who understood me on a level that Claire never had. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a twinge of sadness. 8 years of marriage reduced to a few signatures on a piece of paper. Claire and I had built a life together, shared dreams, and now it was all officially over. Elaine met me outside the courthouse, her presence grounding me. She didn't say anything she didn't need to. We stood in silence for a moment, letting the finality of it all sink in. You okay? She finally asked, her voice gentle. Yeah, I said after a moment. I think I am. She smiled softly, slipping her hand into mine. Good, because now we get to start fresh. A fresh start. The concept felt foreign, but exhilarating. I wasn't the same man who had discovered his wife's betrayal all those weeks ago. I'd been shattered, sure, but I'd rebuilt myself stronger. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was free. The fallout from Claire's discovery didn't stop there, of course. She sent a few nasty texts in the following days, accusing me of ruining her life. I didn't respond. What was the point? She needed someone to blame, and I wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. Instead, I focused on building something new. Elaine and I took things one day at a time, finding comfort and joy in the little moments, quiet dinners, lazy mornings, laughter that came easily. We were both healing in our own way, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. The people closest to us eventually found out about our relationship. There were awkward conversations, sure, but the ones who mattered, the ones who truly cared, understood. They saw that Elaine and I had found something rare and genuine, something worth fighting for. As for Claire, I heard through the grapevine that things with Greg didn't last. No surprise there. She'd burned too many bridges, and from what I gathered, she was struggling to rebuild her reputation. I didn't revel in her downfall, but I wasn't losing sleep over it either. That chapter of my life was closed. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Elaine and I took a trip to the coast one weekend, just to get away from it all. As we walked along the beach at sunset, hand in hand, I reflected on how far I'd come. The man who had been broken by betrayal was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more in tune with what he wanted out of life. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again, I admitted as we watched the waves crash against the shore. Elaine smiled, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. Neither did I. But here we are. Here we are, I echoed, squeezing her hand gently. The horizon stretched before us, endless and full of possibility. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. The past was behind me, and with Elaine by my side, the future looked brighter than I ever could have imagined.